What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and continue learning about Britain's deadliest disaster. Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1, feel free to go check that out first, or you can stay here in Part 2. That's perfectly fine as well. But in Part 1, I started learning about Britain's deadliest disaster, which occurred about 8,000 years ago with this event called the North Sea Tsunami. Again, you can learn the details of all of that back in part 1 of this series, but basically it's a giant, destructive, horrible tidal wave that destroyed a huge part of Britain 8,000 years ago. And right now, we're picking up here in part 2 with the narrator about to describe exactly what it was like if you were in the UK 8,000 years ago and this horrible cataclysmic event was literally happening to you right now. So, it sounds terrifying, and, with that being said, let's take a look.
Somewhere between a few seconds and a few minutes later, the horror began.
Oh.
A wave up to 40 meters high came crashing in at a speed of 35 meters per second.
Wow.
At such speeds, water feels less like how you'd expect it to feel and more like a moving, churning, boiling wall of concrete.
I was just about to say, like, when water is moving really fast, or if you jump into water from a really great height, it's not like landing in a soft, puddle of water, like you think of water. It's more like, he said, like hitting concrete, like brick wall. 35 meters a second? Oh my god. So this is a huge tidal wave, 40 meters tall, coming at you like a wall of concrete out of nowhere. The people at the time had no idea this was about to happen to them. It's pretty terrifying, huh?
Those on the shore may have just had enough time to realize they were dead before it struck, sweeping entire coastal communities away.
Oh
After
my
that,
God.
it was the rest of Britain's turn. Mainland Scotland was next to be hit, with a 20-meter wave crashing into its east coast. Estuaries and rivers helped funnel the devastation inland, wiping out fishing communities that were a whole day's travel from the sea. Evidence...
I was gonna say, it's kind of nice that this happened a long time ago. Like, imagine this happening right now. Like, we're just kind of lucky we live right now. And this whole thing started where, there were landslides off of Scandinavia that triggered this tsunami that hit Britain. That could have happened at any time, but it happened 8,000 years ago. But it's still sad. Like, there were tons of people living in Britain at the time anyway. It's just 8,000 years ago that were met with this horrific, not very, there's no justification for this. Just, no reason for this. They just died, just because of bad luck, basically, in this horrible way. And not just that, their whole civilization was basically wiped out. This is crazy. I had no idea this was a thing in British history. This just kind of coming out of nowhere for me. And I can't help but put myself in the position of these people a bit. It's pretty horrifying.
From the Forth River shows the waters might have cascaded over 30 kilometers into the interior, causing devastation the entire way.
Yeah.
This was a pattern that repeated over and over as the wave reached modern England.
Wow.
Valleys filled with water, estuaries were inundated, marshlands flooded. But the worst was reserved for Doggerland, being the geographical equivalent of a...
Doggerland. We learned about Doggerland in part 1. It was this huge, massive land that it used to connect the UK to the rest of mainland Europe. It used to all be just one massive land. And Doggerland was what was, utterly destroyed by this. And basically, Britain became an island after this, if I understand correctly.
Flat tabletop, Doggerland didn't stand a chance. The wave simply washed over it, drowning everything in its path. Of Doggerland's estimated population of 100,000, it's unknown how many could have possibly survived.
Yeah.
Overall, the wave inundated nearly 7,000 square kilometers of Britain, equivalent to the whole of Delaware sinking beneath the waves.
What? This is just insane to think about. Insane. It wasn't just a wave that, killed the people on the coast. this wiped out entire parts of the UK 8,000 years ago. Like the land was just underwater from then on. It never came back. That's insane.
Sadly, this was just the warm-up act.
What?
Over the next few hours, 2 more powerful tsunamis crashed into the devastated coastal communities, killing who knows how many ancient first responders. By the time the last wave ended its path of destruction, East Britain and Doggerland had been devastated.
Yeah, this is why this video here is called Britain's Deadliest Disaster. The most people ever in British history were killed because of this one event. Like, there was just 100,000 people killed by the second wave of this thing, like he just said.
Our best estimates suggest that around 12,000 people lost their lives in Britain, with untold more dying in Doggerland. Even today, this grim tally would make it one of the deadliest natural disasters to ever strike Britain.
Yes.
Adjusted for population, it stands second to none. Only the Black Death in the 14th century killed a larger percentage of Britons. And still, the tsunami's effects weren't over. In fact, its victims would be living with them for centuries to come.
Right. Oh my god. Because you think just about the main tragedy, the main event of this tsunami. But it's not over. Now, tons of land has been rendered completely useless. It's underwater. Or just destroyed by tons of flooding. So I'm glad we're going into aftermath now of this whole thing. What happened after? Oh my god.
Generally, when a large-scale disaster strikes the modern world, there are agencies like FEMA on standby to stop the aftermath becoming even worse than the actual cataclysm.
Yeah.
Of course, this doesn't always pan out, as anyone living in New Orleans in 2005 could tell you, but there's usually at least an attempt at disaster relief.
Yeah, disaster relief. Yeah, that's a thing in the modern day. We're not talking about the modern day. There are no helicopters coming to drop food and supplies like this was 8,000 years ago. So that's just another thing.
Effort to alleviate suffering. Sadly, the Mesolithic world didn't work like this. After the trio of tsunamis had battered them senseless, the prehistoric Britons were left to fend for themselves. Not only did they have to deal with a death toll unlike anything they'd ever seen, but also the loss of everything that they'd held dear.
Right. Like, if you're not dead, your entire way of life, your entire community probably died. Like, it is difficult to actually put yourself in the position of being there 8,000 years ago with the North Sea tsunami destroying your life and land. And maybe that's for the best that we can't really imagine that. Because that's... few, like he said, this event is pretty rare. Like, throughout all of history, this is unique in the death and destruction and damage that this caused. And it all happened in Britain. I had no idea.
Camps would have been swept away, along with any food the inhabitants had stored for winter. Tools, too, would have been lost, and it's not very likely they could just pop down to the nearest store to pick up a new set. Vital fishing boats would have been destroyed. Many of the community's hunters might have been dead or injured, and perhaps even entire oral histories were lost when the older folk drowned. Creatures living in the coastal waters would have been badly impacted too, destroying the most immediate source of food these devastated communities had. In short, surviving may have been worse than dying, and it's now thought many of the initial survivors died from the after effects during the winter.
Oh my god, this is getting depressing. This is just getting worse and worse. It may have been better to die by the tidal wave, being slammed into by a tidal wave, going 35 meters a second. You don't often say that, but that might have been better. I never thought I would say those words. Because if you didn't die, everything you know and love died. And everything you need to survive died. And you probably just died in the aftermath or to winter. Truly, like, no rhyme or reason to this, huh? Sometimes nature just isn't fair.
But even those who made it through to spring weren't out of the woods. In Denmark, there's some archaeological evidence that communities hit by the tsunami turned to warfare in the aftermath to win enough resources to survive. It's possible, if not likely, that something similar happened in Britain and Doggerland. If it did, and the first few years after the catastrophe were likely so grim they'd make 2020 look like a year of candy floss and unicorns. It's interesting to
Oh my
imagine
God.
how it must have felt to live through these desperate times, how it must have
Yeah.
felt to have your perspective so fundamentally altered, the sea going from a benign source of food to a tyrant god capable of devouring your entire world.
I mean, you would just. What could you do? You just sit there and be like, why? Like, why did this happen? And that's all you can do. And then you have to, like, go to war with people, other people that survived, because you're all fighting to just over finite resources at that point. Just trying to survive. I can't even speak. This is like the worst thing I've ever heard of. Like, this is ridiculous.
In the Chinese sci-fi trilogy, The Three-Body Problem, there's a character who becomes terrified of the sun, unable to even go outside in daytime after he discovers its sheer destructive potential. Who knows if these long-forgotten humans came to feel the same way about the ocean?
Yeah.
In the end, it's thought that Britain's population...
I am scared of the ocean now. I almost wish I didn't know about this. Like, I want to go back. I want to go back to not knowing that this is a possibility. This is very terrifying.
Took several centuries to recover. To give you some perspective, a quarter of Britain's dying would have been equivalent to about 16.5 million people being wiped out today. But life goes on, and recover people did. Even Doggerland recovered, at least for a while. For a long time it was thought that the Storega tsunami marked the moment Doggerland's vanished forever beneath the waves. But nowadays, it's thought the land survived the catastrophe, its landscape altered, but not annihilated. However, it couldn't survive what was to come next.
What? Oh my god, it doesn't end. For poor Doggerland. Right, because I thought Doggerland is not a thing anymore. That's why the UK is now islands and not connected. It actually, so eventually people, found a way to survive. Life goes on after the, just like they say, the classic phrase, life goes on after getting struck by a 40-meter wave at 35 meters a second. Life goes on.
As the glaciers continued to melt and the sea levels kept on rising, Doggerland, at last, became uninhabitable. As the waters rushed over its surface, cutting Britain off from Europe forever, its desperate people migrated en masse to the island. There's even a theory that it was the descendants of the Doggerlanders who settled Orkney off the coast of Scotland and built the great Stone Age structures there. Around 5,500 BC, the last traces of Doggerland sank for good. By then, all memories of the gigantic wave that caused so much chaos probably faded away.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this wave from the North Sea tsunami, this great wave that destroyed everything, that would be all you're talking about. Like, if you actually do survive that, that's all you're talking about. You and passing it down to your ancestors and children. You're talking about that wave that destroyed everything and everyone. I would think that would be actually, like, not fade into memory. Not, like, people would talk about that forever.
It had been a one-off event, a freak accident that had killed many, but was far from a regular occurrence. Or was it? Given how destructive the North Sea tsunami was, scientists today are struggling to answer a chilling question. Could it happen again?
What? 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 This is exactly what I was worried about. This is exactly what I was talking about. Why I'm scared now. But I was kind of joking. If we're being honest. I was like, this could happen again. Ha ha ha. It could happen again? Like, where? How? What? Okay. I think we have to keep going at this point. Wave of the future? This could happen?
If you live in Britain, your experience with tsunamis is probably relegated solely to news reports from other nations. Despite being surrounded by water, Britain rarely suffers from the ocean in the same way that Japan does. Sure, occasionally some massive storms might brew up and wash away a load of coastal roads and rail tracks, as happened during the winter of 2013. But by and large, the chances of watching your house gaily sailing away atop a wave are roughly zero. Or so we Brits like to believe.
Oh my god. So, historically, Britain does not suffer from, like, tsunamis and storms and stuff like this. Traditionally. Except 8,000 years ago. But, that might not last forever, apparently. But it's in Britain. It's not here in the United States. There's still a chance for us Americans to survive, maybe.
However, go digging into the historical record and you'll find more waves than you might expect. The greatest of these was likely the one that hit the Bristol Channel in early 1607 or late 1606 under the old Julian calendar. On
Oh, that was only like 200 years ago, actually.
January the 30th, floodwaters suddenly swept up the channel from the Atlantic, drowning entire villages and washing away herds of livestock. The inundation killed around 2,000 people and left its mark on churches and old stone bridges across the region. But while a tsunami is suspected as being the cause, a storm surge can't be ruled out. Things are more certain where the Cornwall tsunami is concerned. In 1755, an offshore earthquake leveled the Portuguese city of Lisbon while also sending tsunami waves shooting out in all directions. One of these impacted southern Cornwall. While no one actually counted the number killed, it was declared that there was great loss of life. So tsunamis and Britain, while rarely seen together, are not total strangers. But
Okay. So there's been a few relatively minor occurrences since, I guess.
there are two other tsunamis in Britain's geological record, and frighteningly, they hit exactly where the North Sea tsunami did. Around 3000 BC, and then again in 500 AD, Shetland was hit by two tsunamis at least 12 meters high. In each case, what caused them is a bit of a mystery, but it does seem to show killer waves devastating Scotland are not quite rare enough.
Wow, there's been miniature occurrences of tidal waves and tsunamis striking parts of Britain in history. I guess it's difficult to like determine these things from records and whatnot. Two other times, maybe. Oh my god, I am sorry, Britain, that this might be a thing. Maybe it's the trade-off that like Britain is very, very safe from like a lot of storm and tsunamis in the modern day, but every couple thousand years, you might get struck by a giant killer wave. That's just, that's how it evens out, I guess.
That being said, the chances of a tsunami battering Britain in your lifetime are extremely small, almost unimaginably so. And this is a big but. That's not the same thing as those chances being zero. Thanks to climate change, there are currently processes taking place beneath the North Sea that could potentially spell destruction, as in the run-up.
What? I keep getting frightened, then like I feel good, like okay, very small chance. And then he comes back again and he's like, but it's actually getting worse again. It's like, I don't know what to feel anymore.
Up to the Storegga slide, trapped methane in places like Greenland could well be melting, even as local glaciers retreat. As the 21st century grinds on, we may find the combination triggers earthquakes, leading to submarine landslides. While these slips would almost certainly be too small to cause many noticeable effects, there is an outside chance that a Storegga-sized event could happen again. If it does, all bets are off. Were this new slip to take place in this fall.
Wow, that's a bit scary. I don't know if he's trying to kind of make this a bigger deal than it is, to make it seem kind of dramatic. But there is a chance, however small, of some kind of landslide happening again because of trapped gas under the ground and recreating something like a tsunami towards Britain. It's possible, I guess.
Svalbard or Greenland, it could send a cascade of water hurtling towards Scotland unseen since that fateful autumn day 8,000 years ago.
Wow.
Waves taller than 10 metres could come crashing into Edinburgh and Newcastle, causing destruction on a massive scale. Bridges would be swept away, cars would be picked up and carried like toys. Fires would break out, smaller buildings would crumble and break, and everywhere people would be caught up in the water's embrace, killed as surely as if they'd stepped in front of a freight train.
Does he have to be so vivid, so descriptive with the scenes of death and destruction? I don't know if that's necessary. I get the point. Scary. I didn't even know that this was a thing. The North Sea tsunami, Britain's deadliest disaster 8,000 years ago. And I certainly didn't know that it was maybe possible to have something like that happen again.
If you've ever watched the footage of the Japanese tsunami sweeping inland, you'll know what horrors to expect.
Wow.
The slow-moving wall of death, the flood that obliterates roads and rail tracks.
Yeah.
The untold numbers dying.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, this nightmare scenario remains purely hypothetical.
Yeah.
While the San Andreas Fault or the Cascadia earthquake will certainly unleash chaos at some point in the next century or two, the next great North Sea tsunami may never come. It could be that another 8,000 years from now, our distant descendants are still waiting for that next great wave. But that won't change the fact that the real disaster already happened. 8 millennia ago, the peoples of two regions were forced to watch as everything they held dear was destroyed. It was a cataclysm on par with anything in modern history. The Titanic, 9/11, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, they all pale compared to this ancient catastrophe. The main difference...
And it's a little hard to appreciate just how horrible and destructive this was, because it was so long ago, compared to a lot of worldwide catastrophes that have occurred in the modern day. We have, like, video records of it, and photos, and this is something, like, no one will ever have a picture of, or anything like that. You just have to kind of think about it. And it's pretty insane that this actually happened.
Is that we were able to record those other tragedies, to write articles, and make videos, to record our stories so the disaster wouldn't be forgotten. In the case of the North Sea tsunami, no such records existed. Nothing survived to tell us how it felt to be those ancient hunters watching their world crumble around them. Nothing but a layer of sediment in the geological record, waiting patiently for someone to decode something that finally happened in our lifetimes.
Yeah, that's amazing that people actually were able to discover that this event happened just by studying, like, the sediments and layers of land underneath the dirt and stuff like that. It's pretty amazing that they got this much detail.
Now, at long last, the story of that bygone tsunami's victims can be told, their forgotten suffering finally understood. So I'm not...
Wow. I just need a moment to digest that story. What the heck was that? When I went into this video, I was like, Britain's deadliest disaster. Okay, did something happen in Britain in the last 100 years? Something I missed? Something I didn't see in the news? I didn't expect to see something from 8,000 years ago. But it did not disappoint. This is definitely Britain's deadliest disaster, and it was kind of like a history lesson, too. It's very well done. This is by Geographics, and I gotta give that a like, because that was a great video. So well done, well researched, and I get it. This was a pretty shocking story to hear about. Pretty scary, and it's not like it's just in the past, like he said. This is something that could come back and affect us now, like in the future. Probably not now. Let's say that. Probably not now. Think we're okay. I think Britain's gonna be okay, but you never know. And that's scary. How's that for a dramatic end to this video right there? Holy cow. But I enjoyed this. I enjoyed learning about this. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on this deadly disaster in British history. Oh my god. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Britain and British culture and stuff about Britain I've never learned before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.